Markelle Fultz will shock everyone once he returns from injury. Let's get into this. Quickly before we get the video started, if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more NBA content just like this one, hit that subscribe button and that post notification bell. Anyways, back to the video. Markelle Fultz was drafted number 1 overall in the 2017 NBA draft, which was originally owned by the Boston Celtics, but they ended up trading with the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Sixers ended up drafting Markelle Fultz. The expectations coming out of college for Markelle Fultz and joining the Philadelphia 76ers were definitely sky high. Coming out of college, Markelle Fultz was seen as one of the best scorers coming out of the NBA draft, and also one of the best passers and playmakers coming out of the NBA draft. And when you combine all those things together, you get the number 1 overall pick that season. The biggest part and the biggest draw of Markelle Fultz's offensive game was how versatile he was. Markelle Fultz's best ability was definitely getting all the way to the basket and dunking over defenders and finishing around defenders with crafty layups, but that's obviously not all he was able to do. He was definitely able to hit some mid-range shots. He was pretty effective with that, but also in college, it might be hard to know now because he can't do this currently at the moment, but Markelle Fultz was actually a pretty decent three-point shooter in college as well, making him a true 3-level scorer. But in terms of his passing and playmaking abilities, of course he played in Washington, which wasn't a great college at that time in terms of their skill level, and his teammates weren't obviously amazing, but he was still able to find his teammates in great spots, get them wide open shots, and really help that Washington team actually win some games, even though they weren't that talented, which was probably the most impressive thing about Markelle Fultz. And overall, Markelle Fultz was definitely just a very, very impressive player, and clearly the number 1 overall pick going into that draft. I know obviously Jason Tatum should have been the number 1 overall pick now looking back in hindsight, but at that time, Markelle Fultz was definitely the consensus number 1 overall pick, so it wasn't a shock that the Sixers took Markelle with the number 1 overall selection. And there was also a ton of excitement that Markelle was specifically going to the Philadelphia 76ers, because now a lot of people were saying that the Sixers now have a true big 3 of Markelle Fultz, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid. But ever since Markelle Fultz actually got drafted to the Sixers and actually started playing for them, he struggled tremendously right out of the gate. Originally during Summer League for Markelle Fultz, in the first 2 games, Markelle actually looked very, very good. He was showing everything that he was showing in college. He was doing everything very effectively, hitting 3-point jump shots, just scoring very effectively, getting his teammates involved. Overall, he was just playing very well in the first 2 Summer League games, but in that 3rd Summer League game, that's where something really went wrong for Markelle. Of course, he had a little bit of an ankle injury, which obviously wasn't that serious and wasn't that bad at the time, but that ankle injury ended up keeping him out for the rest of Summer League, and once he actually came back during the regular season for the NBA, he just didn't look right. It wasn't necessarily from his ankle, but when you saw him playing out there, he was scoring, getting all the way to the basket, but he wasn't shooting whatsoever. He had plenty of opportunities where he had wide open 3-point shots, but he just refused to take it. There were some mid-range shots that he wasn't even taking, and then eventually it came out that Markelle Fultz had an issue with his shoulder, but it was a weird injury because it then came out that the Sixers medical staff actually looked at his shoulder and didn't believe Markelle had anything wrong with his shoulder. And now this is turning into a pretty bizarre situation. Markelle was saying that he had something wrong with his shoulder. The medical staff was saying there was nothing wrong with his shoulder. A lot of people outside the organization were starting to think that maybe this was all in Markelle's head and maybe there was actually nothing wrong with his shoulder. That's basically what the Sixers medical staff was saying, that it was basically all in his head. Markelle was obviously saying it was not. There was something legitimately wrong with his shoulder, and at that point the Sixers actually ended up holding Markelle out for more than half of the season to get his shoulder right or whatever was going on with him. And now at that point, Markelle's confidence was at an all-time low. From a guy who was previously the number 1 overall pick going into the NBA with a ton of confidence, now ever since he's gotten into the NBA, he really hasn't played that great and as well as he maybe otherwise should have, being that number 1 overall pick and all the expectations he had going into it. And now he was dealing with the shoulder injury where a lot of people didn't believe him that there was actually something wrong with the shoulder, and it was just a mess for Markelle at that point. But late into his rookie season, Markelle actually did end up coming back and playing for the Sixers, and actually Markelle did play pretty well. He had one game where he actually got a triple-double, becoming the youngest player of all time to actually record a triple-double. And overall, even besides that, Markelle definitely did have a few good games, and there were definitely some good signs. Markelle looked a lot more confident out there. He was getting to the basket pretty effectively again. He was showing a real ability to actually hit that mid-range jump shot. When that shoulder was really an issue, a lot of people thought that he wouldn't be able to shoot whatsoever, and that's what the concern was. But Markelle was definitely showing the ability to hit that mid-range shot, especially in terms of his pull-up mid-range jump shot. Also a little bit of a post turnaround fadeaway. He's using his length and athleticism very effectively to actually get that mid-range pull-up shot over the defender. But there was still an issue with Markelle. He obviously still didn't necessarily look very comfortable out there, and there was many different opportunities where he would be completely wide open for a corner to three-point shot, or maybe a wide open three-point shot in general, and he would just refuse to take that shot. And clearly, although Markelle was playing better than he was previous, there was still a little bit of an issue with Markelle going forward, and obviously he didn't look 100% right at that point. And even though Markelle was playing a lot better towards the end of the season than he was at the beginning of the season before he sat out, head coach Brett Brown actually decided not to play Markelle basically at all in their playoff run, and he only played in really garbage minutes. And now for a guy who was obviously lacking some confidence, this was definitely not a good sign going forward for Markelle, because from Markelle's perspective, even though he's starting to show some success in the latter half of that NBA season, it still wasn't enough for head coach Brett Brown, who decided to not actually play Markelle in the playoffs and showed a lack of confidence in Markelle. And of course, that definitely could not have felt good for Markelle going forward. But after a very interesting rookie season for Markelle Fultz, he actually decided to hire Drew Hamlin, who is definitely a well-respected trainer in terms of helping different NBA players improve and fix their jump shots. So once a lot of people saw the news that Drew Hamlin was actually working with Markelle on his jump shot, a lot of people were very happy about that and very excited to see if Markelle could actually go back into the next season and be the same player as he should have been going into his rookie season in terms of being able to hit that three-point jump shot and just being a lot more efficient in terms of his jump shot shooting ability and gaining more confidence back in that jump shot. But after putting in all that work during the offseason, unfortunately for Markelle and the Sixers organization, once Markelle came back the next season, Markelle looked even worse in his second season than he did in his first season. Markelle completely couldn't shoot at that point. Markelle was still not taking any three-point shots whatsoever. Even if he was wide open, he just would refuse to take them. He was still taking that mid-range shot, which actually looked pretty good for him, but once he got to the free throw line, that's when things really got bad for him. Markelle's jump shot looked absolutely awful. It seems like he put in no work and he was just messing up his jump shot at that point during the offseason, and you can tell all the confidence, the little confidence that Markelle must have had at that point after putting in all that work during the offseason was completely gone at that point. And at that point, a lot of Sixers fans and a lot of people around the organization were starting to realize that Markelle probably was a bust for them. But in the middle of Markelle's second season with the Sixers actually decided to cut their losses and ended up trading Markelle Fultz at the trade deadline to the Orlando Magic. For Markelle Fultz specifically, this move was actually amazing for him. In Philadelphia, and also being the #1 pick from Philadelphia, there was a ton of pressure on Markelle, and once he started to not perform and really play very poorly and whatever was going on with the shoulder, the pressure just became more and more at the point where Markelle just couldn't deal with all the pressure and then obviously just ended up not playing well whatsoever. But once Markelle actually got traded to the Orlando Magic, two things actually went in his favor. First, the Orlando Magic obviously were not known as a team that needed to win right now, so there would be a lot less pressure on Markelle to actually provide right away for them. And also another thing that would be going his way was obviously the Sixers were the one that drafted Markelle, and they were the one that really had the expectations and really needed Markelle to become a star in this league. But now the fact that Markelle was already seen as kind of a bust for the Sixers and now got traded to the Orlando Magic for basically nothing, the Magic definitely didn't have that same sort of expectation for Markelle going forward, so the pressure on Markelle to actually perform like a #1 overall pick wasn't necessarily there anymore because he got traded to the Orlando Magic. So that was definitely another thing that took a lot of weight off his shoulders. And in Orlando, I think we saw all that pressure that was taken off Markelle's shoulders really benefit him. He played a lot better. Markelle was showing a lot more confidence out there on the court. He was still getting all the way to the basket. He was pulling up for that mid-range shot. He was showing an ability to actually make a floater. He was passing the ball pretty efficiently and effectively. He wasn't necessarily hitting three-point jump shots still at that point, but there wasn't pressure for him to actually do that, and the Orlando Magic were actually giving Markelle as much time as he possibly needed in order to really develop and feel comfortable in that three-point shot, not really putting pressure on him like there was when he was on the Philadelphia 76ers. And in Orlando, Markelle definitely showed a few flashes of what he could potentially be going forward, especially against the Los Angeles Lakers. He had an absolutely incredible game where he put up 30 points, he put up a triple-double in that game. He just played so well in every aspect of the court, and overall Markelle Fultz was just looking a lot better than he was. In this previous season, in the 2020 NBA season, Markelle, before he got injured, was averaging 13 points per game, 3.1 rebounds per game, and 5.4 assists per game, which is definitely a very serviceable starter for the Orlando Magic. But just as Markelle was finally starting to turn his career around, unfortunately for him, he went down with an ACL injury. Now, of course, it's terrible for any NBA player to actually go down with any injury, but especially an ACL injury. But the good thing, in my opinion, about this injury is now Markelle could really focus on his jump shot when he's rehabbing back from his ACL ACL injury and not necessarily need to rely on his athleticism as much as maybe he otherwise needed to in the past. And if he could really work on his jump shot through this recovery process and maybe feel a lot more comfortable in his jump shot, especially his three-point jump shot, I think Markelle as a player would just be a lot better player than he would be if he didn't otherwise do this. So even though it's obviously a negative that Markelle tore his ACL, I do think there is some positives to this rehab process for him. But now the question is, after everything that Markelle went through ever since he's gotten into the NBA, and after he's definitely shown the ability to actually play decently well in Orlando, why do I personally think that Markelle is going to shock everybody once he comes back from his injury? I basically think the consensus about Markelle Fultz at this point is he's definitely a pretty good player coming off the bench, maybe a low-level starter with some potential going forward. But in my opinion, I think Markelle's a lot better than that. I think Markelle can at the very least be a very, very good level starter in this league, or maybe even a low-level all-star at the peak of his career. I think he's that good. Obviously, he has the potential to do even more than that, but at this point in Markelle's career, I don't think it would be fair for me to say this guy could potentially be a superstar going forward. I just don't think that's very realistic at the point that Markelle is currently in his career. But could that happen going forward in the future? Yeah, I definitely think it could, but I don't necessarily think I could say that at this point. But overall, I still do have a lot of confidence in Markelle Fultz going forward, and I definitely think he would do a lot better than a lot of people expect him to do in this next season and just in his career in general. Now, of course, Markelle has a ton of work to put in to actually get to that point, but I definitely think Markelle can do it. He's shown the ability in college to have that much natural talent going forward, and he definitely has shown the ability to put some work in during the offseason, which is very important for a player his age going forward. So I definitely think that Markelle could actually get to those points that I mentioned before. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think in the future Markelle could get to that point where he's a low-level all-star or maybe a really, really good starter in this league, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.